Are we live? We're live. Hello, everyone. I feel like I'm having issues with my lighting today, and I feel like it looks funky. I look too pale, or like, I don't know, whatever. So hello, everyone. All one viewer that it's telling me that I have, though there are many more of you in the chat, so I know that that is a lie. The cake is a lie. I know that B. Griffin is here. I just saw Jesse Meek say that he made it and he didn't think that he would. Iron Daisy's won. Squid Monkey, Fixed Bayonets, B. Griffin. I think I mentioned him already. By the way, B. Griffin, supposedly, well, not supposedly, according to Nightbot, which is the little chat bot now that I'm using to help mod the chat a little bit. According to Nightbot, you were the most active person in the chat last week. So a little recognition there, I guess. Also, I fixed... Some people were complaining last week that if they said like LOL and capitals or were, putting a couple emojis, it was timing you guys out. I played with the settings a little bit, so hopefully that won't be happening so much today. So we'll see how that goes. Ian Moon is here. Let's see. Fixed Bayonets. Oh my goodness, already. I can't watch at the moment, but I'll be back later. Mental health is important. I bet I can get my Spurg to watch. Ha ha ha. Hashtag Fixed Bayonets. Watch the news. Aw. Womp womp. Let's see. Squid Monkey, I think I said already. Prothopector? Don't know. I don't know if I said that correctly. G Jeep. Uncle Mike. Judged is here. Gary Hendricks, Mr. Rover Pilot, Meathead, G23, Mike Vasquez, Mike Bolton, Rosen Wolf. There's Q. Okay. Let's see. Oh, and Albert, Trashman is here. The Red Vortex. Lots of peeps in here. And let's see. Trashman. You know what, dude? You're just in charge of my intros from now on because you have some good ones. Oh, can I get this up on the screen? Let me see if I can do it. Oh, it's not letting me. Oh, that's so sad. All right, I'll just read it off. Live from the Liberty Lair, it's the lady who hits harder than the Kung Flu, who can take on more than a dozen UN blue helmets in a bar fight, who likes her shot polished, powder dry, and tea in the harbor. Here's Jolly! So, actually, funny you mentioned the flu. I am fine. I am still sniffly, as I mentioned last week. But this has been the most unproductive week for me ever. Combination of husband being sick with the flu. He was in the hospital over the weekend. My car having issues, me going in and thinking I'm just getting an oil change. And then suddenly I'm at the car dealership the entire day without internet because apparently I need tires and brakes and all kinds of other things. Migraines. It's been a hell of a week, guys. So today's video is going to be a little bit different, or rather, I should say, the live stream is going to be a little bit different, because I have been getting a lot of questions lately. Since I've mentioned a couple times on the stream that I am in the mental health field, I have been getting a lot of questions from viewers about mental health and how it pertains to gun laws and carrying and all of that fun stuff. Plus, we just had, I know some of you mentioned it in the chat, I've been seeing it, the new bills that have been filed in New York that would require a mental health evaluation before getting a firearm. So I have written a video about that, but because of the week that I just mentioned, unfortunately, I did not get that video out before this live stream. And the whole point was to get it out before the live stream and then continue talking about it on the live stream. But that's not what happened. So here we are. I did not do my drinking with the super chats. So, oh, and thank you, Chad. And Robin says, you forgot sponsors 10 lashes for you. I did. So we actually have a brand new partner slash sponsor, whatever you want to call it, to the channel. And unfortunately, you can't really see my whole shirt in the shot. Let's see if I can get this. All right, here we go. Today's shirt here. Oh God, that looks terrible from this shot. You know what? Let me stand. This is so unprofessional right now. So here we go. There we go. Let me squat in front of this. Nobody needs an AR-15. Well, nobody needs a whiny little bitch, yet here you are. I was not saying that into the microphone, so you probably didn't hear it. Anyway, so this is a shirt from the new sponsor slash partner. Now my camera and lighting is all messed up for some reason. Let's see if we can get this. Wow, this is not a good start. So this shirt is from Libertarian Country. They have tons and tons and tons of shirts available on their website. And if you use my link in the description, then it also helps out the channel. They have this shirt. I got a whole bunch of shirts in from them today. One of them says, "Enjoy capitalism." One of them is about the ATF and how it should be a convenience store and not a government agency. There's shirts about free speech, gun ownership, there's a really great one. My personal favorite is Make Orwell Fiction Again. I got one of those too, so I will be wearing those here and there on the program. So again, that is Libertarian Country, and their link is down in the description. We also have, of course, as always, My Patriot Supply, Cabela's, Guns.com, Palmetto State Armory, and did I say My Patriot Supply? You know the gist. All of them are linked down in the description. So if you can't do a super chat, or if you do super chats and want to help out the channel in other ways while just doing your regular shopping, you can click any of the links down in the description, do your regular shopping through those links, and it helps out the channel. Okay. So, it looks like the camera is fixed a little bit. So some of the questions I've been getting lately, I've been getting a lot. A lot of them pertain to what disqualifies you from gun ownership, at least under current law. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, like, okay, can just going to a therapist make you into a prohibited person? Could be being diagnosed with ADHD, for example, make you into a prohibited person? Not under current law. The laws that have been proposed in New York, well, I'll be discussing that in the video coming up that should hopefully be out tomorrow or Sunday, but under current law, no. Under these proposed New York laws, we don't know, because they don't know what the standards are. These new laws coming out of New York that have been introduced in both the the New York House and the New York Senate simply say that there needs to be a mental health evaluation before every gun purchase. They don't say what they're going to be looking for, and mental health evaluation is a very, very broad term. When it's used in the field, really it means a full workup, including personality tests, tests of memory, cognitive functioning, executive functioning. That's your stuff like planning, impulse control, risk-taking, things like that. They would probably be looking for suicidality and homicidality, but again, it's not clear. It will be the commissioner of the Department of Mental Health in New York, along with whoever else in the police department or something, that will be deciding this. Under current law, federally, I can't speak to each individual state law, but I would imagine it's about the same. Federally, currently, the only things that can make you a prohibited person under mental health is if you have been in an inpatient psych ward, or if you have been into a detox or drug treatment. Okay? So, and that includes whether you were involuntarily committed or if you voluntarily signed yourself in. If you were involuntarily committed, you would know it, because that requires, in Massachusetts, it's called a Section 12. In Ohio, I believe it's a pink slip, which is kind of funny. there's different, it's called something different in each state, but basically, if you've been sectioned, it means that either a doctor or a therapist or a police officer decided that you were in imminent danger of hurting yourself or others, and then you had to be committed to an involuntary hold. It's usually 72 hours. It is in most states, I believe. And then you're not allowed to leave for those 3 days and sometimes longer. So Alberta Vila here says, why would you want mentally ill people to have guns? Well, see, the problem is what would you define as mental illness? Is having a fear of public speaking, is that considered mental illness? Because you know what? It's in the DSM. My DSM is under my light. One moment, please. All right, so if we are going by standard definitions of what is included in mental illness, for example, we have, let's just open this up. Let's see, dementia is considered mental illness. Caffeine intoxication, this is 305-90, is considered mental illness. Let's see. Nicotine withdrawal is in the DSM. That is 292.0. Let's see. Brief psychotic disorder, major depressive disorder. Depression is considered mental illness. General anxiety is considered mental illness. And that's just someone that, you're a nervous person. Well, you're considered mentally ill. So if we're saying, should mentally ill people have guns? You need to really, really think about what you're asking and how you're going to standardize that and what the cutoff is. Technically speaking, having Asperger's is considered mental illness. Autism, high-functioning autism, is considered mental illness. Someone who has a history of disordered eating is considered mental illness. Social phobia, agoraphobia, that's fear of leaving your house. OCD, which could manifest as anything from, I've had clients that are just really, really neat, is how it manifests. Clients with obsessive hand washing, clients with obsessive counting or flipping of light switches fall into OCD, and that is considered mental illness. So if we're asking the question of should mentally ill people have guns, unfortunately, I'd say that 99% of the population has some quirk about them that could fall into the spectrum of mental illness, so that would automatically disqualify 99% of the population. I also do not believe that I have or anyone has the right to decide who gets to defend themselves, because essentially that is a question of, if someone is in danger, who gets to live and who gets to die? If someone breaks into your house and you're there and you don't have a gun, you're probably going to get hurt. You're at the very least going to be assaulted. You could be killed. Anything could happen, right? So saying that someone doesn't have the right to defend themselves is essentially saying that they get to die if they are put into or find themselves in a dangerous situation. And frankly, I don't believe that I or anyone else has the power to make that decision. Right, someone right here in the comments says, I have Asperger's and ADHD. I'm not dangerous. That's exactly my point, okay? ODD, Prothopector says ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, equals disagreeing with the DSM. That is not true. So oppositional defiant disorder is, it's a disorder that you see in children. It can only be diagnosed in people under the age of 18. The criteria for ODD is someone who basically completely refuses to follow rules or authority in all of their environments, which includes classroom, at home, wherever else they might be. I have worked with children in the past that have been diagnosed with ODD, and I didn't diagnose them as that. They came to me with that diagnosis. 9 times out of, actually, no, I would say 10 times out of 10, what was really going on is that that child was growing up in a broken home or otherwise unstable environment that did not actually have structure or a set of rules to follow, or had experienced trauma and were actually reacting to that trauma. I don't think I've ever met a kid that actually legitimately had what the DSM considers to be oppositional defiance. Really, the only time that you would see that legitimately is in what we call antisocial personality. So, clinical antisocial is what people refer to as psychopaths and sociopaths. And the weird thing about that diagnosis is it actually requires someone to previously have been diagnosed or meet the criteria for either ODD or conduct disorder, at least under DSM-4 TR. I haven't checked it out in the DSM-5. They actually wanted to get rid of personality disorders in the DSM-5, and that is nonsense because psychopaths and sociopaths do exist. They are often politicians. So let me check some of these. G Jeep says, hopefully this will help you feel better after a tough week. Thank you. And it's 1776. That's funny. Let's see. Ozark Yeoman says, would ASPD, autism spectrum disorder, make someone a prohibited person? Not under current law. So current law is, again, you have to be hospitalized or otherwise judged mentally defective. So being judged mentally defective, what that requires actually is a court decision. So you would see that with if someone is so unable to take care of themselves that they are assigned a legal guardian by the courts as an adult. Usually that is a Rogers guardian, which means that someone else is handling your doctor's appointments, someone else is handling your finances, and you are court ordered into treatment or taking medication or something like that. I have only seen that in people who were severely and chronically mentally ill, typically people that live in group homes, okay? People usually with schizophrenia or post-traumatic stress that manifests with really severe psychotic symptoms, which is hallucinations, hardcore delusions. So that's seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't there, usually hearing things that make commands. So that's what we're talking about when we say severe and chronic mental illness. It is very severe chronic post-traumatic stress, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder that manifests with psychotic symptoms typically. So no, just having Asperger's, or now it's just flat autism. So being on the autism spectrum should not make you a prohibited person unless your state is doing something really messed up. Let's see. Let me grab, there were some more super chats. Let's see. Eric Hammer says, I'm an Iowa citizen with a documented history as a teenager of depression. As a teenager, I was admitted twice to a psych ward, and once as an adult when I was in the Marine Corps. I'd only hurt a person in self-defense. Exactly. So in your case, because you were in the Marines when it happened, that's an interesting case because sometimes military records aren't put in with the rest of them. So it would be interesting, like, if that, like, ended your career in the Marines, that would be a question. But if you were allowed to continue in service, that might make things funky. You might have like a court case with that or something. There is also always the possibility that if you have been hospitalized or put into a detox or treatment, you can actually petition to get your rights back. it is very, very difficult to find a psychologist, psychiatrist, doctor, whatever, to write that letter for you and advocate on your behalf just because of the liability issues. So, technically speaking, if someone is in private practice and has liability insurance, which they absolutely have, you can't really be held accountable for like if someone comes into your office and they don't tell you that they're suicidal, or they deny suicidality, and then they go out and something happens, it protects you from that to a degree, so long as you have proper documentation. But something like petitioning that someone isn't dangerous and then something happening, that is a big no-no. Big no-no. So David Buckwalter says, I voluntarily admitted in New York for suicidal ideation in 2009. Diagnosis was MDD, so it's major depressive disorder. It just means depression. Diagnosis was MDD, triggered by my fiance passing away. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have been off medication for almost a decade. These laws stop people getting help. Absolutely. That is exactly what happens. And you know what? So having depression after someone passes away is a total normal response. They're actually pushing for something called complicated grief or complex grief to be in the next version of the manual. And technically speaking, just because something is in the manual doesn't mean that you are mentally ill because you have it. What it means is that insurance companies require us to code you with a diagnosis in order for reimbursement. A lot of like the ACA, the American Counseling Association, the APA, all of these organizations, the CBCC, all of these or NBCC require people to keep documentation. A lot of times for liability and reimbursement purposes, and through the documentation, you do have to give a diagnosis. So having something like complicated grief put into the manual would really just mean that we could say that you're grieving without diagnosing you with a mental illness and get reimbursement for that. But exactly, so someone who had a horrible traumatic like death in their family and then felt depressed about it, and it's been 10 years, like, so we're saying if you say that people with mental illness or have been, committed or whatever can't own a gun, you're prohibiting that person, for example, and that's just terrible. Let's see. I saw another one. Eric says, I served my full 5-year contract. I presently carry full time with a CWP. So there you go. So then I'm glad that worked for you. Fire Makes Me King says ODD equals Greta. No, actually. So Greta, I am not her doctor, so I cannot officially diagnose her, but I have seen several reports that actually says that she has autism and OCD and something else. I don't remember what it is. And people that have autism typically are also very, very anxious people. Now, OCD is on the anxiety spectrum. It is considered an anxiety disorder, but oftentimes with people with autism, you also see that they have a very big amount of generalized anxiety. It is not one of the symptoms of autism, but they go hand in hand. So for Greta, autism, OCD, and anxiety. I've even seen some reports of PTSD. I don't know how accurate that is. What else we have here? Rancho Chava says, is there any way to petition politicians who are against the Second Amendment, ban them from using taxpayers' money to pay for their armed security since they are trying to disarm tax-paying citizens? That is an excellent question. Probably not. They would probably argue that they don't use taxpayer money for it, but their salary is taxpayer money, so that's a load of crap. Oh, Jared is here. He says, keep crushing it, my friend. Thank you, Jared. Let's see. Jerry Mister says, who's paying for all this shit? Well, that depends. If you're talking about the New York laws, That would be out of pocket. The mental health evaluation that you would be required to get would be out of pocket because there is no insurance company that's ever going to say that that is medical necessity. And medical necessity is required to be reimbursed and for them to cover things. Let's see. Chris Holman says all weapons are weapons of war. The 2A was intended specifically for military weapons. I'm not sure if that is pro or against. Robin here is warning guys, the bot will get you if you type all caps. So I said it that I think it would do that after 20. We'll try that out and see if it works. Kay Wright says stuff that most Congress members couldn't pass. That is true. That is true. So I mentioned clinical antisocial personality earlier tonight. So there is some research that was being done in Chicago. It has since disappeared, which is interesting because it said it looked at some of the personality disorders and it found a bunch of people that have them and looked at what kind of jobs they typically work. Your antisocials, you see, gravitate most of the time to careers in politics and law enforcement. Narcissists are typically journalists and newscasters, which is kind of funny. So Richard Newman says, you and I both know that in the end, mental health issues will be used to prohibit a person from owning a firearm simply by that person's desire to own a firearm. Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I mean, I think that is demonstrated in red flag laws, for example. That is demonstrated in these bills that have been introduced, in New York. And just by the nature of the fact that mental health, I mean, it's no secret that it is a very, very liberal field. I remember when I was working in the public sector, I was working in a nonprofit organization, and a lot of my clients were gang members and guys on probation and parole. I mean, these were some bad dudes, right? And that was around the time that the Obamacare law came out that part of the risk assessment paperwork from the state would require asking if people own firearms or had access to firearms, and then that information was going to be given to the government. And I was like, hey, this is pretty messed up, and this goes against this law and blah 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 blah. And people were asking about the process of like getting licensed and things like that. And then I expressed that I knew that knowledge, and they're like, oh, well, how do you know that? And I was like, well, I'm a gun owner. The minute I said that, people's like perception of me completely changed. There were some people that were fine, whatever, but this was said in a staff meeting. And after that, there was, I would say, like maybe half of the people that had been in that staff meeting, like every time they saw me, it was like, oh my God, that's the girl that owns guns. And they were frightened, and these people had never been frightened of me before. And they were like, oh, do you carry all the time? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh my God. It was like they thought that it would just like go off at them or something. I've only met maybe 2 or 3 therapists that were not afraid, like deathly afraid of guns. Let's see. Mental health eval before purchase, therapist getting paid to tell you no, says Jameson Wilfon. So that is a problem, because in these bills, first of all, they say mental health professional. So that could be anything from a social worker who, I am sorry if there are social workers here, but social workers and therapists are like nemesis. We are each other's nemesis, basically, because like, so social workers, they go to school for 2 years, and a lot of what they do learn some mental health stuff, but mostly what they're learning is social policy and culture. And then the minute they graduate, they have a license, and the state, like, welcomes them with open arms into like Medicare programs, the VA, state hospitals, all of this stuff. If someone is a therapist, they do that 2 years, sometimes 3, of schooling that is entirely based in mental health and the helping relationship and all of that, plus a minimum of 2 years of supervised practice before they can even take the test to get licensed. Um, and, you know, the people that you see in DCF offices or CPS or at the VA and things like that, 9 times out of 10 are social workers. So mental health professionals can include those people. It can include therapists. It includes the person who has graduated and isn't licensed yet and so isn't allowed to see the bulk of people. It can include psychologists and psychiatrists. So this bill isn't clear of like who would be doing these evaluations. Now, typically, a mental health eval is a full battery of tests. You have the WAIS, which is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. It's the WISC or the WIPSI in children. So you would have the WAIS, you would have the TAT, that's the thematic apperception test. Basically, you would have cognitive tests, intelligence tests, memory, learning, personality tests, behavior, risk assessment, frustration tolerance, all of these things. It is a long battery of tests. And usually you sit down for 2 to 3 hours a day, 2 to 5 times, depending on the battery of tests being administered. And that is typically, if someone says you need a mental health evaluation, that is typically what that means. There's no way that could be what they're doing for this. And if they were, my God, that is a disgusting amount of personal information that the state does not need. It could be as simple as administering like a suicidality test, but even that goes everywhere from like asking a couple questions to doing a full LRAMP, which is typically preferred for liability reasons. That's like a 5-page thing of all these detailed questions about the person's mental health and risk levels and their support system. It's ridiculous. So it could be that maybe they're just going to administer a Beck depression inventory, which is like 20 or 21 questions, and you can like take it and score it yourself. It's so easy, but then why would they need someone hired by the state to do this? So, I mean, they are not clear. There is nothing in the bill that talks about what any of these standards would be, what this evaluation would be, what it would include. It's terrible, terrible law. So Rosenwolf says that in Pennsylvania, it's called a 302. Okay, so that's the involuntary commitment. So there is one for mental health and there's one for substance abuse. The substance abuse one requires a family member to go to the courts and petition a judge to say that basically you so high, you can't make decisions and you are in imminent danger, basically. 1960 hiker dude says, so if I walk in, turn around and drop my drawers and proclaim, evaluate this, do I pass and get to purchase my firearm? No, probably not. They would actually probably call that indecent exposure and label you a sex offender. Let's see. Well, we've got another couple super chats up here. I checked that one already. The I Renaissance says, thank you so very much for taking this seriously. Well, thank you. I mean, and thank you for thanking me, I guess. I mean, this is my job, the mental health part. So Jim Grady says, is that the shirt that says on the bottom, nobody needs whiny little bitches either, yet here you are? Yes. Yes, it is. That is the shirt. So here we go. There we go. And you get my boobs. So that is from Libertarian Country. They are linked down in the description if you want to pick up the shirt and help out the channel. Teresa Locke says, slippery slope in definitions of mental illness. Absolutely. Sam Colt says, oh no, not the DSM. LOL. Yeah, look at this baby. Version 5, I actually have a digital file. Someone was kind enough to buy it and send me a copy. So that I have on the computer. But yeah, like alcohol abuse, alcohol withdrawal, personality change due to general medical condition, stereotypic movement disorder, Tourette's. All of these things could be considered. Here we go, Tourette's 307.23. All of these things could be considered mental illness if you ask the wrong person, really. Stuttering 307.0. Reading disorder 315.0. Learning disorders are in here. So, again, there is a very, very slippery slope of mental illness and what we are considering it to be, and who gets to decide, what is too mentally ill. Hal Edwards says, great shirt. Thank you. So here's a good point. So B. Griffin says to Alberta Vila, who was the one that earlier made the comment that, mentally ill people, why would I want mentally ill people to have guns? So B. Griffin says, is being opposed to government policy mental illness. It was in the Soviet Union. And that is true. They're actually, so one of the things that they do a lot of times if you're taking an abnormal psych class or a diagnostic class or something like that is they go through some of the things that used to be qualified as mental illness. I don't remember the names of some of these. Actually, you know what? Let's Google it. Mental illness, slave running away, because that used to be. Drapetomania was a conjectural mental illness that in 1851, American physician Samuel L. Cartwright hypothesized as the cause of enslaved Africans fleeing captivity. Drapetomania, that was considered a mental illness, and it was for slaves running away. Homosexuality used to be considered a mental illness. Hysteria used to be considered a mental illness, and hysteria is a fun one. Hysteria can exist very rarely. But basically, that was a diagnosis that was given to women who their husbands thought were reading too much, or wives who requested a divorce, wives who wanted to work, things like that. That in the 1800s was considered a mental illness. Masturbation used to be considered a mental illness. What else? Let's see. I actually recently found a psychological test from 1947, I believe, that would determine whether or not you were a fascist, and was trying to coin that as a mental illness. Cross-dressing used to be considered a mental illness. It's weird, certainly, but that used to be considered a mental illness. You can sometimes consider erectile dysfunction to be considered a mental illness. So, I mean, it is a broad spectrum. Subjective definitions, exactly. And Selena Hernandez says basically all of us. That is true. So there's actually a test called the MMPI. It's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. I've always wanted to take one, though it's a little bit scary. So it has, I forget how many scales are on it, but it is a very, very long test. And it even has scales to figure out if you are trying to lie and get a false negative. It has another scale to see if you're trying to get a false positive. It can measure anything from depression to narcissism. And any client that I've ever had that has taken it, it has been extremely accurate because it measures all of these things on a spectrum. But basically, they tell you, you can't just walk into an MMPI and get a good score, because everyone has something quote unquote wrong with them. if you got bit by a dog as a child, this is a metaphor I use a lot. If you got bit as a dog by a dog as a child and you are afraid of dogs, you have a phobia, and that means that you are not 100% mentally healthy. For example, anything down to like the way that you interact with people, shyness, all of these things. If you ask the right person, could consider that as mental illness, and it's something that could show up in like the MMPI, for example. A point that I make in the video coming out is up until the last few years, diagnoses were made on a multi-axial system. So you had access 1 through 5. Access 1 was, mental health things. Access 2 was personality disorders. Access 3 was intelligence. So if someone had borderline intellectual functioning, something like that. 4 was, your environmental issues, and access 5 was something called the GAF score. The GAF stands for Global Assessment of Functioning, and it is a scale from 0 to 100 that assesses how healthy and stable a person is. And it is basically impossible to score over an 85. Even the most healthiest, put together, stable person will not score above an 85. It is impossible to get a 100 on that scale. And actually, through doing some research for the video that's coming out, I saw that it looks like the VA still like uses the GAF score. And I was seeing things from law offices on there talking about scores of like 90 above, and like there's no such thing. The highest I've ever given someone was a 75, and the lowest I've ever given was a 23. But I have seen as low as, I think, a 12, which means, well, if you are a 12, you are not doing good. Actually, let me see if I can pull it up in here, though it'd probably be easier to just screen share. Let's pop this up. Plugging in my monitor here. So GAF, Global Assessment of Functioning. I'll turn on my spare monitor here. It hasn't been used since, I want to say, like 2013 maybe, because they were going to change the DSM. The DSM-5 came out, I think, in 2010, but Congress kept putting off it getting used. So let's see. Here we go. Here's one's from a school. So this one, here we go. Yep. So let me toss this over here and do a screen share for you guys, so you can see what this looks like. So here we go. We'll do this full screen. So this is the GAF scale. Whoops. Let's go over here. So this was in the DSM-4 TR. Oh, it's page 34. Whoops. So it blocks things off in combinations of 10. So this one actually says inadequate information, but on a lot of these, it'll say 0 to 10 on here. So the lowest I've ever given someone was a 23, which would fall into this category. Behavior is considerably influenced by delusions or hallucinations, or serious impairment in communication or judgment, or inability to function in almost all areas. So this is where you are usually if you're getting hospitalized. If you are honestly, probably even maybe like a 46 or lower, you're probably getting hospitalized if you are assessed under this old thing. But if we go way up here, so 91 to 100 is superior functioning in a wide range of activities. Life's problems never seem to get out of hand, is sought out by others because of his or her many positive qualities. No symptoms. There is no person in the world that ever has no symptoms. So even like having, you can see mild anxiety before an exam, but good functioning in all other areas of your life, or having an argument with a family member automatically drops you down to between an 81 and a 90. Here, difficulty concentrating after a family argument, for example, or temporarily falling behind in schoolwork automatically drops you another 10 points to a 71 to 80. Mild insomnia, well, now you're in the 60s. So as you can see, something like a mental health exam, if they are still using the GAF score, you're not going to score 100. You're not even going to get an A. You're lucky to get like a B, like minus. um, let's see. Wait, Q says I always wore a dress while I was in the army trying to get a Section 8. Really? So Stephen Lundgren says, Liberty Doll, I think one of the biggest issues is who gets to decide who is mentally ill and unfit to own a gun. Absolutely, that is the issue. Who gets to decide? Because the thing is even with like these scales and things like that, a lot of this is subjective. So let me tell you a little bit of a story here. So when I first got into the field, I interned with the Department of Mental Health, right? So these are, like I had said before, chronic severe mental illness, people who you have to have been hospitalized at least once for an extended period of time to get DMH services in Massachusetts. People that live in group homes, people that live in state hospitals, because they did until recently in Taunton State have group homes that were part of the hospital. So those sorts of people, so you work with that population, you realize that some people, their baseline functioning is, on a 1 to 10 scale of like depression or suicidality, they're at a 7, and that's just their daily life, and that's how it is. So if I have someone who always kind of scores at a 7, I'm not going to make a huge deal about it until they move up to an 8 or a 9. If they move up to an 8 or a 9, then we are having a conversation of what we're doing to help that person stay safe, basically. So I went from there to my very first job outside of the field was private sector, but it was a bad private sector job where basically that same scale, someone scores like a 3, you are sending them to the hospital just in case. This same thing would require us, so it was in-home therapy. If we walked into a house and a mom and dad were arguing and their child was present in the home, this organization actually required us to call DCF and file on that family because a child was present in the home while parents argued. That is ridiculous. There's no other place that I've ever ran into that held those standards because, people have arguments. They should probably try to not have arguments in front of their children, but that is not abuse or neglect, at least by most standards. 9 times out of 10, DCF would screen something like that out. But still, that just goes to show that people have different trigger fingers, and what they find concerning can be very, very subjective. I've had times where kids go into their school guidance counselor and, they're like, oh man, sometimes I just wish that I didn't wake up in the morning. And that is very, very sad. And that child obviously is going through something and needs some help and needs to be taught some coping skills or something like that. But that doesn't warrant calling the emergency room. There are some schools that a kid walks in and is like, man, I wish I didn't wake up this morning. Boom, they are gone. The school is calling the parent is required to pick that child up, and then suddenly they show up in my office and the school is requiring me to write a letter saying that this child promises not to kill themselves while they're on school property. Seriously, that happens all of the time, just because a kid went to their guidance counselor and said that they were depressed and had something called what we call passive suicidal ideation, which means you might think about it, and everyone thinks about it at some point. Passive ideation is relatively normal. Active suicidal ideation is when there's a plan or intent or means, and that's when things get serious. But when people are going through things, they might have passive ideation. and that's something that you like monitor, but it's not particularly worrisome. Some people find that so worrisome that they freak out and try to send that person to the hospital. So there's just there's no really like objective anything when it comes to mental health, really. Let's see. Claustrophobia, yeah, that would be considered illness. Yeah, Mr. Mark says I could be considered mentally ill, but I'm not going to kill anyone. Exactly. And you know what? Most mentally ill people aren't violent. Let's see. David Rogers says 2A is not the right to bear arms. That is, oops. Oh, it disappeared as I was reading it. Oh no, where did it go? All right, let me see if I can find that. Oh, wow. This is really, the chat on my end is very, very behind. Wow, incredibly behind. Neil Burchell says, thanks to Master Baiting, we got Kellogg's cornflakes. That is true. Fun fact, had to edit for a super chat. Oh, man. Chris Holman says his dog had a seizure 2 days ago, scared the snot out of me. That is terrifying. Fun fact, I once had a transfer case given to me when I was doing in-home therapy, and the previous therapist failed to tell me that this person had epilepsy, and I walked in, and it was maybe like my third session with that person, and I walked in, and she was like, oh man, I don't feel good, and then she stood up and then promptly had a grand mal seizure right there in front of me. I had no warning. I had no idea this person had epilepsy. It was probably one of the scariest things that I've ever seen. Selena Hernandez says, Doll, is gender dysphoria now removed from DSM? Someone else was discussing. I think they removed it. No. Gender dysphoria is not removed from the DSM. Gender identity disorder is. Gender dysphoria is actually required to transition. So at least in the state of Massachusetts, in order to begin hormone treatment or surgical treatment or anything like that, if someone is trans, they are required to undergo mental health treatment first to determine that they are actually trans and it's not autism, because there is a high rate of autism among trans people, that it's not trauma, things like that. A lot of that stuff, honestly, still doesn't get weeded out, but the person is required to have gender dysphoria. So the gender dysphoria is still in the DSM. Jeff Foster says, will PMS keep you from getting a gun? Not currently, but there is something that they've been trying to get in the DSM called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It basically means extreme PMS. That I believe is still under the category of needing more research, but the Black Bear Forge says, Liberty Doll, maybe the politicians should take mental health evaluations. They should. They would never pass. Let me make sure. Here we go. Rancho Chava says, I'm going to have a stepson soon who suffers from autism. I would like to take him to the range and teach him about gun safety, but I'm worried about it legally. Legally, it shouldn't be an issue. What would be an issue is if he has sensory issues. So a lot of times people with autism have sensory issues. You see it manifested a lot, like stereotypically in movies and TV, you see them having problems with sounds and loud noises. Sometimes if you're out and about, you might see someone with big earmuffs on or something like that. They might also, but that sensory could be certain textures, both of like food or touch. It could be certain temperatures. Being too warm or too cold might really upset people with autism sometimes if they have sensory issues. Certain smells, certain tastes, certain sensations. So you might see kiddos that cannot stand socks with seams over the toes, for example. I had a teenager that being wet was like the worst thing in the world for her. So she had a lot of trouble with personal hygiene and other ADLs, activities of daily living, washing hands, doing dishes, doing laundry, things like that, because the sensation of like wetness on her skin, like, threw her through the roof. So legally, it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, especially you're going to be supervising him, right? So it shouldn't be an issue. Let's see. Daniel Dennison says, I like pudding. Is RBF in DSM? I'm not sure what RBF is. Robin Patty says, masturbating will make you go blind. Let's see. Oh, okay. So Ambrose Killpack, I hope it's okay that I say this, says, I have autism, dude. I've been to the range many a time. Right. Steve Lundgren says, why do doctors ask patients if they own guns or ask kids if their parents own guns? What happens with that information? That is required under Obamacare, to my knowledge. There's also states that require it. What happens with that information? I believe right now it just goes into your medical record. The only people that should have access to that medical record are you, your doctors, and the insurance companies. The insurance companies, though, they only get that information if they request it. So if they do a record audit, which would really only be if, like, so for an example, I had a kiddo that I saw for maybe like 2 or 3 years, and she was doing really well, and then things just took a downturn, and she started coming in more often. The insurance company called me up, and they're like, hey, why is this kid suddenly coming in every week? Like, what's going on? You know, we want some information. And so what I had to do is I had to write a report about her diagnosis, her treatment goals, the symptoms she was experiencing, any suicidality, and basically like make a case for that person continuing to come in at that rate. So sometimes records or practitioners are audited in that way. So that's really the only time that that information should be given to the insurance companies. In some cases, some information is given to DPH, which is Department of Health, Public Health. I don't know about these things specifically, unfortunately. Lots of men saying they can't see. B. Griffin says it goes into a government database. That is a possibility. Let's see. The Dems are Unite the Narcissist Party. My hubby thinks I have RBF. Oh, resting B face, probably. No, that's not an official diagnosis, not yet. Patriot 762 says it's a shame we have to evoke our Fifth Amendment in the doctor's office. That is true. That is absolutely true. Let's see. Here we go. This is the one I was looking for earlier. David Rogers says 2A is not the right to bear arms. That is a natural right for self-defense. 2A is the government not infringing on that right because securing a free state might have need of a citizen militia. That is 100% right. Excuse me. Q asks, what if I lie? So there is no rule against lying to any practitioner. I've had many people lie to me. I had people lie to me about all kinds of things, and then suddenly they don't come into session and they're not answering their phone, and I'm like, well, what's going on? And I then see on the police blotter that they got arrested for dealing crack cocaine, for example. People lie to their practitioners all the time. If a doctor finds out, they might discharge you from their treatment because it's they might say, well, I can't trust you then to, take medical advice or things like that. So it's possible. Dick Gozinia says, how do you feel about considering an irrational fear of firearms a mental illness? Well, I would say that it is not a sign of stability. I don't really like using the term mental illness. I like to talk about like stability and instability. I would say it's not a sign of stability, depending on the degree. Stephen Lundgren says, put the gaff back up there. I think I would score 100. I don't know, man. I don't know. Here we go. So, superior functioning in a wide range of activities. You're not even allowed to have like anxiety before an exam or be upset over an argument with a family member or anything like that to score 100. Um, yeah, it's not happening, brah. Sorry. You're actually not even supposed to give out scores of 100. I wonder what a cannabis advocate scores. So that's an interesting question because cannabis used to be considered a mental health issue and now it's not. Not really. Um, let's see. Um, Liberty Doll, where can I find a copy of the GAF test? You know what? I'll actually pop it. So this one is from albany.edu. You can find it in a DSM, which you probably don't have access to because the thing was like $100. So I'll put it in the chat. So they don't use the GAF anymore, to my knowledge, but I mean, I did do some searching, and apparently the VA still uses it. Damn, someone gave me an angry react. Let's see. Bum bum bum. Anything from SHOT Show this year you are excited for? My lighting is looking really bad right now. I don't pay attention to SHOT Show because all of it is illegal here. So, let's see. Anything you tell your doctor goes into a database and the insurance company has access to it. Who they share that information with after that is up for debate. That is true. Insurance companies can share that information with third parties. You have to sign a form, but it can happen. And George Hayes over at Facebook says, and what of the issue of fluidity? Mental states are fluid, can change month to month, year to year. Exactly. That is 100% true. Robert Graham says, wouldn't this all violate HIPAA laws? Technically speaking, yes. That was one of the first videos I did on my channel, actually, about how these new laws in the ACA violated HIPAA. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's a violation of HIPAA, 100%. But I don't know. Government does what government does. So Daniel Dennison says, yeah, a liberal doctor can just process anyone who admits they own firearms as mentally herp-a-derp and take their rights away. Yeah, quite frankly, I mean, they're not supposed to. So you're not supposed to bring any of your personal judgments or biases or fears or any of that stuff into session. It happens. There's a word for it, transference and countertransference. You're not supposed to do it, but I mean, easier said than done, I guess. You can, seeing it in actual practice is something different. Let's see. Oh, wow. So Judge says, I'm required to see a shrink every other year since my promotion, and I hate it because I don't trust shrinks. Too many of them just want to shove pills in folks' faces. It's nice to see one that cares. Thank you. I'm assuming that means that you're in law enforcement. And the thing is when people say shrinks, typically what they mean are psychiatrists, and psychiatrists' entire job is, in fact, to prescribe medications. Psychiatrists are the only ones that can, psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners are the only people that can prescribe medications. Therapists, social workers, and psychologists cannot. So typically a visit with a psychiatric nurse or with a psychiatrist is like 15 to 20 minutes tops, because all they do is say like, oh, are you fine? How are your symptoms? Are the meds working? Here's your prescription. You're not going to get therapy from them typically. And you're getting your therapy from social workers, wouldn't advise it. Mental health therapists, so that's your LMHCs, your LMFTs, LPCs, LADACs, depending on the state, and your psychologist, your PsyDs, or your PhDs if they're doing counseling. Mr. Fixit says, you did know the MMPI test is owned and monitored by the Church of Scientology. I did not. It was not created by them. It was created by a University of Minnesota. So, and it is, I believe, older than Scientology. Let's see. This one up here. It's weird that one's still up there, even though I read that one. Mr. Fixit says, what is the MMPI? How is the Church of Scientology involved in it? I'm not aware of it. Okay, so the MMPI is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. So, Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Let's pull this up. I don't really want to do the wiki article, and Psych Central is crap. Let me see if I can find a legitimate source on this. Pearson Clinical, maybe, but that's the MMPI 2. Well, let's see. Let's pull up maybe the manual would have a date on it. Here we go. So the manual, as you can see, that is not the correct window. Let's do a new one here. And pull this up. So here we go. The manual, the revised version of the manual is from 1951. So it's a revision of the 1943 MMPI edition. So, right. So it is very old. I'm pretty sure that predates Scientology. Let's see. And you actually have to be, you have to be trained to administer it and score it. Honestly, a lot of times it gets sent out to someone for scoring. Let's see. APA dictionary. Let's go with this one. Pretty sure it was University of Minnesota. So, okay, here we go. Let's pop this over into this window. Can you see that, you guys? So, all right. So this is from the APA dictionary. So the MMPI was first published in 1940. It consists of 550 true-false items grouped into 9 scales reflecting common clinical problems such as hypochondria, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviant, masculine feminine interest, paranoia, I can never pronounce that word, anxiety, schizophrenia, and hypomania. And this is also the one that has the scales of whether you're faking good or faking bad. The current version is the MMPI 2, which was put together in 1989, which features 567 questions. And there's also the MMPI A, which is for adolescents. But it was, the MMPI 2 was published with 338, originally developed by Stark, Rosecrans Hathaway, and U.S. psychiatrist John Charnley McKinley at the University of Minnesota. So that is where the MMPI comes from. Nothing in there to do with Scientology. Banging gongs with your mom says, just now got the alert that you were live. Shitty YouTube. Oh, I'm sorry about that. William Edwards says, if you mention your religious beliefs, no matter what, they will classify you with a schizoid personality. And that is not what's supposed to happen at all. So more than ever now, there is a big, huge push for multiculturalism and multicultural competence. And it flat out, even when I was in school, they flat out said, like, okay, if someone's religious or has spiritual beliefs that you don't follow, like, you can't classify that as a mental illness. So, for example, the places that I worked had really big Cape Verdean populations and Portuguese populations and Haitian populations, right? So sometimes people from those places believe in like spirits and voodoo and curses and things like that. I don't believe in it. It's kind of weird. Is it a mental illness? No. You cannot ethically classify that as a mental illness. Someone, on the other hand, who thinks that they are a demon king, for example, which is something that I have encountered more than once, that would be considered a delusion. And schizoid personality isn't anything with religion. It's I'm actually gonna have to look this one up because it's been a while since I worked with someone who was diagnosed with schizoid. I primarily work with and it's similar to schizotypal. So primarily the personality disorders I've worked with are borderline, um, and some antisocial. I've had a few murderers and things like that, and histrionic. So schizoid personality disorder, no. So schizoid personality disorder is basically someone by the DSM who doesn't have any close relationships with anyone, whether it's friends or family members. They don't want to be part of a family. They don't want friends. They do everything alone. They do pretty much all they can to avoid people. They don't have any interest in sex or intimate relationships. They don't really have any interests in much of anything. The only people they do interact with are usually like first degree relatives, like moms and dads. They are indifferent to praise or criticism, and they are emotionally very cold and detached and have a flat affect, which means no facial expressions. So having religious views is not going to get you diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. So if you have that, certainly I encourage anyone, if they've been diagnosed with something, to have a conversation with the provider that gave them that diagnosis and say like, hey, like, why did you diagnose me with this? That is absolutely a conversation that people should be having. Robert Graham says in New York, some counties require you to give the police your social media passwords in order to get a pistol permit. I did not know that. I know they were floating that in Florida, and I didn't think that it passed. Oh, darn it, this just skipped down again. I missed whoever that was. I'm sorry. I know I'm missing some of these. Sam Colt says, I guess I'm okay. My GP doctor goes to the range with me. That is awesome. That is very cool. Very cool. Robin says, how many guns and PMAGs constitute hoarding, and is it a mental illness? So hoarding is now in the anxiety disorders. As of the DSM-5, it's lumped in with like OCD. And basically the qualification for anything being a mental illness is if it causes you distress and like impacts your functioning in your life. So if you have so many mags that they're all stacked up and like you have to have tiny little paths getting out of your house and you don't let anyone in the house because it would be considered a fire hazard or would get you like condemned under the Board of Health, that would be considered that would put it into the mental illness category. Let's see. Let's see. These days, being a constitutionalist is considered a mental illness. I mean, if you talk to the wrong person. Let's see. Let me grab the rest of these super chats because I see it is 8:15. Liberty Doll is cool from Dean Machine. Thank you. Ooh, I'm going to read this one just because it's interesting. F14 Flyer says, I had to take an MMPI for my airline job 30 years ago. A battery of 500 questions, a multiple choice with these same questions asked different ways throughout the test. Absolutely. That is exactly what it is. And, you know, I've had a few people, I love it when people get psychological testing. I love reading the results. I'm such a nerd. I've had a few people take the MMPI and it was fascinating. Q says the important test is your thetan level. That's Scientology for sure. AL says if more people learned to do more self-analysis and keep the weeds out of their garden, they'd enjoy a more fruitful life. Love you, LD. That is true. Though, I mean, you have to be careful, like, because some people will then go to the lengths of trying to diagnose themselves, and that's like never good. Pierre says, as a Canadian gunny with Asperger's, thank you so much for doing this live stream. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for thanking me, I guess. I wish that I had more time than I did. I mean, I could talk about this stuff for hours. I decided when I was like 11 that I wanted to be a therapist, which is ironic because I'm not enjoying it so much anymore. But I remember when I was like 13, I went to a yard sale. And someone there had like gone to college for psychology or whatever, and they had all their like psych textbooks from the 80s, and I totally bought them all and read them cover to cover. Bradley Bookman says, hello, LD and the dollhouse. I want to get these last super chats before well, someone says that Hubbard stole the concepts of the MMPI test for his fake religion. Probably. I mean, he was a science fiction writer, though, originally. I mean, if he stole parts of it, that doesn't mean that the MMPI is Scientology, though. Let's see. I can see. So someone is putting magical thinking in quotation marks. So magical thinking is magical thinking is things like trying to think of like actual examples. I haven't had someone. Oh, magical thinking. So here's one. Someone, you see this a lot of times with people that have psychotic disorders. So someone that, for example, thinks that if you are wearing the color red, you are putting out a certain message to the world. Magical thinking would be the news anchor on TV is giving you a secret message. Magical thinking is thinking that you are the resurrected spirit of a dead god. That's one that I've seen. Things like that. Things that are very definitely not real. If something is possible within a version of reality, then it's not considered bizarre or magical thinking. Magical thinking is like bizarre stuff. Siegfried Armory says, get both of your demon kings to fight each other. There can only be one. Oh, goodness. F14 Flyer says, love the shirt. Thank you. Again, Libertarian Country. They're linked down in the description. You can check them out. Nunya Business wants to know if hoarding guns is in DSM. No, it is not. General hoarding is. I can read that one for you guys. Now, keep in mind that this is the TR, the 4TR, so it's the old version. But hoarding, I've had some hoarders. Primarily when I was doing in-home therapy, which was interesting. Let's see. H. Index. I mean, hoarding is not always like what you see on hoarders, but that is a very good... oh, it's actually not in here. Oh, interesting. Well, hoarding is a disorder in the 5. But generally speaking, it's not being able to throw things away with like imagined use or sentimental value. And that would even be things like, you don't throw away your Ziploc bags or something. And it creates distress and makes living your life difficult, basically. Schizotypal is a superpower, not a disorder. That's funny. So Mike White says, I love to be alone. It goes beyond that. It goes way beyond that. It's hard to describe. I've had a few people, again, when I was with like DMH or doing some of the more severe populations that were diagnosed with schizoid, and They're basically like empty with no emotion and like no facial expression. They're very robotic people. Um, so someone says, so if you have voices in your head that claim to be God, you're okay. So my argument is, if they're telling you, if those voices are telling you to do something bad, that's bad. Or really, like, I've had people that heard voices and the voices didn't bother them. So like, okay, you do you. It's a problem if the voices upset the person or distress them in some way. So like I've had people that had schizophrenia and they weren't medicated, but they weren't dangerous and they weren't distressed in any way. So all right, cool, then you don't need medication. Let's see. Diedrich Cooper says, what happens if your wife or husband falls in the restricted zone and you have guns, and since you're very restricted, how do you enjoy your 2A? That is dependent on what state you live in. Quite frankly, some states have laws or have part of their red flag laws that firearms cannot be in the home at all. That you would have to look at on the state level. I would encourage you to check with your local gun advocacy group for that. I just realized I failed at drinking my water today. Gary Hendricks says, I have CDO. It's like OCD, but all the letters are in alphabetical order as they should be. That's a good one. Deja Vu says, good advice on talking to the person who gave you the diagnosis. That's true, because you know what? I've had some people come in and they're like, oh, I've been diagnosed with bipolar. And I say, well, have you ever had a manic episode? And they said, no, I don't think so. And we go over the criteria of a manic episode. And they haven't, but it's because for whatever reason, lithium has helped their mood. And so someone along the way said, oh, well, if lithium helps you, then you must have bipolar. So some people will look at the medications you're on and like assume your diagnosis or your issues based on those medications. But in reality, like any psychotropic medication can do like an umbrella of different things. Let's see. I was just looking, Andy Robosage, I was just looking to see if RPGs were in the DSM. They are not. They are not. Leaving Earth says, is it a positive or negative schizophrenia? Well, so the requirements of schizophrenia diagnosis actually require positive and negative symptoms. And by what we mean by positive or negative symptoms is like, so negative symptoms would be flat affect, no expression, would be depression, would be, so negative symptoms are like if things are taken away. Positive symptoms are if things are added. So positive symptoms would be hallucinations, delusions, things like that. So that's probably not what you were talking about, but that's the gray area. Oh, it's 8:24. Okay, guys, I got to dip in like 5 minutes. Do California gun laws constitute mental anguish? Anguish, probably. Selena Hernandez says, what if hoarding causes detachment and seclusion from family members? Then I would say that would fall into like a diagnostic category because it is causing distress and impairment in the person's life. And really that's what it comes down to, is if it causes distress in some way. Oh, Tim Allen is here. Hello. Jesse Meeks says, I've had to take the MMPI for every law enforcement job I've ever had, and after both shootings I was involved in. Wow, interesting. And Andy says, money's for having a better weekend than last. Thank you, Andy. That's very much appreciated. Hopefully I don't have a reverse domino when I try to upload my next video like last time. If you are on my Patreon, you know exactly what that was about. Jeff Foster says, magical thinking. I'm going to take everybody's guns away and nobody will be mad about it. That could possibly fall into magical thinking, though I would guess if we were going to look at that diagnostically and put some category on it, I would say that actually would probably fall into delusions of grandeur. Personally, that's what I would classify that as. Um, and let's see. Oh goodness, we have some more super chats here. It's the chat is not keeping up. It's bizarre. Like all of those just popped up at once. How do I convince the DM that my wood elf rogue needs a suppressed PPK? He just keeps saying guns don't exist or something like that. Well, then you kind of have a bad DM. See, my DM is like awesome. He's like, you know what? If you can come up with something and sell me on it, we will do it. And I also always play a rogue, though right now my character, like, I don't know, he's sort of a roguey, more of a barbarian, which is interesting. That's not typical. And I never play the dumb guy, and this time around I'm playing the dumb guy. Okay, we're going to take the last couple, and then I have to run to the point that I'm not even going to take down my setup. I'm going to have to come back over the weekend to put all my stuff away. Jesse Meek says, my daughter just got her CCW in Kansas, and she has Tourette's. That is awesome. That is awesome. And, you know, Tourette's is not always what everyone thinks it is. It could be something like a tic or a cough. It's not just yelling obscenities. And it can be triggered by stress. Robin Patty says 7 out of 10 voices in my head told me to be here tonight. The other 3 told me to stay home and clean my guns. So a lot of people think that that would be multiple personality disorder. That would be schizophrenia or even just psychotic disorder. Multiple personality disorder is, in fact, as if multiple people, 3 or more, are living in your head and you don't know about it. And they suddenly take over and you lose hours or days of time and have no idea what happened. And it is in response to severe and prolonged trauma. It is very, very rare. It's actually a dissociative disorder. And it looks like that was the last super chat. I don't know why this one from like an hour ago is still up at the top. Sean Adam Davis says, what do you rate on a Myers-Briggs test? Oh, goodness. I don't remember off the top of my head. All right, this will be the last thing that I do before I go. Let's see. Last time I took it, I screenshotted it. I know that it's introvert. I am extremely introverted. Despite the way that I might present on live streams, I am extremely, extremely introverted. I believe I'm an INTJ or something. Oh, goodness. Let's see. Oh, I know it's in my phone somewhere. I know that it's the logistician if you're doing it from these 16 personalities. It's funny though, whenever I take it, I sort of vacillate between 2 different results, but that one is the closest one. I know that it's the same personality type as Julie Borowski, and I took another test recently that put me in the same personality type as Tom Woods, which I thought was really cool. In good company. Oh, you know what? I can't find it. Albums, maybe. It would be in screenshots. You know what? I can't find it right now. That is on screenshots. You know what, guys? I'm not seeing it. That is really unfortunate. I know I have it somewhere. And you know what? Actually, I could Google real quick. Commander personality type is not commander. It's logistician. Commander is my husband, actually. Logistician personality is ISTJ. That's what I am. ISTJ. All right, so All right, that is it. I have to run to D&D night. Oh, and see, everyone is saying run to D&D. I know. Okay, so everyone, thanks for tuning in and hanging out. I hope I answered all of your questions. I might try to do another one of these again, since this is my job. This is what I do, right? I do the therapy. I do, I do the raping, as some people say. Uh, so, thanks for tuning in and sending in your questions. I'm sorry if I missed some super chats while I was ranting, or if I missed some questions. But again, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to click the thumbs up button, hit the like button, and check out the partners in the description. And next week, oh my God, I didn't even say this, and this is important. I meant to say this way at the beginning. Next week, the live stream is not going to be on Friday. It is going to be on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. I will put out an announcement. Antonia Okafor is going to be on the show. And then at the Friday time, I'm going to be over at The Philosopher on her channel. The live stream after that, I actually have a couple people that are running for state senate in Virginia that reached out to come onto the show. So we're going to have some guests for the next few. All right. So that is it. I have to run. I'm going to get a phone call in like half an hour asking where I am, because I'm not going to be there. So everyone, thanks for tuning in and helping me to spread the message of liberty. Good night.